Are you ready to get energized? It is another EG4 Power Hour episode. Joel, are you going to giggle at my intro?
Yeah, I wasn't ready.
We have a great episode here today, and we want to thank everyone for joining yet another episode of the Power Hour. I'm your host, John Tostanowski with EG4 Electronics. I have a special guest here today. Every guest is special. I think every week I say this one especially special, but we actually have a new team member here on the show, Mr. Joel Openshaw, our technical sales manager.
No, I appreciate the introduction. I feel like I'm supposed to get up in front of the class and
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I've just started with EG4 this year. I'm joining on as the technical sales manager. My role and goals with EG4 is to get ahead with technical training. We have an incredible product line across from our batteries, inverters, our MID, and we have a lot of people who are ready to support these types of products. But our product is growing faster than I think people have the ability to run. And so, with the accessibility of the markets or distributors, my goal is to get ahead with these installers and get them the training that they need before they're on these job sites, right? So they don't show up and realize, oh, I needed a paralleling kit because I bought a few extra batteries for this project, or, I needed, this, side of a conduit connector or bits and bobs. So I want to get there ahead of time. I've got an incredible team of people who have been with EG4 who have a ton of experience, not just installing things, but really technically taking care of the product line. So we're going to be out there getting deployed, getting with these installers before they run into any of these issues, and in that way, it'll be smooth sailing. They'll be able to roll out and use some of the most cost-effective solutions and not have to think twice.
Yeah. If you've watched our other podcast, actually, one of your, on your team and really a longtime senior member here at EG4, Nathan Unruh. He's the host of Grid Gone Wild. So that's one of our technical podcasts. I know some of our audience, they watch that podcast or listen to it. The work that you guys collectively as a team are doing is really incredible. We're super stoked to have you here at EG4. And, I echo your comments, like the product and the brand in particular, we have grown so much and we're taking over a lot of market share. But with that comes the struggle of teaching people how to use and install the equipment. So we want to be able to have a good training strategy, particularly for our distributors and our professional installers that are utilizing our equipment. But we also want to figure out new and innovative ways to capture training for the DIY market and make sure that our kind of, hobbyist customers, folks that are installing, maybe they have an EG4 system installed already and they're upgrading some equipment. They're not necessarily doing a lot of jobs all at once, but a huge part of our customer base is the off-grid community or the DIY community, if you will. And we want to be able to help them too. So I'm excited.
Yeah, EG4 has been a great company getting involved with. More than anywhere that I've been able to work before, EG4 remembers its roots. Right? There's a reason we're sitting here in Sulphur Springs. The people who helped start this company and grow this company are from here. Right? They want to give opportunities to the people who live here. This is a traditionally small town. This isn't Dallas. This isn't where you're going to find just a plethora of people with engineering degrees desperate to drive into the solar industry. But this was built here and put here for a reason because EG4 is committed to that mission. So when it comes to our DIYers, we know who built EG4, right? Yep. And that was the people in our DIY community who took a risk on a new brand, on a young brand, right? So we're not going to forget you. We're going to make sure that this is an accessible, product line, and that the training is going to be in place. And so for that, we're going to be really leaning on our distribution partners. We have quite a few of those across this country, but what we'll have is regular training opportunities at these distribution locations. And again, this will be with multiple different companies, multiple different distributors, and everyone, regardless of where you are, should have reasonable access to coming in and having in-person FaceTime with our trainers, with our hardware, with our products. Ask us anything you need, and we'll work to get it done. Otherwise, we always have the traditional, methods of going through our online programs to get help, get resources through our
Yep.
support and training.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that are listening, live, like please drop a comment below as to where you want to see us. What locations across the country you want us to show up at, because we want to get our training trucks out on the road and do an EG4 road show. So if you're a professional installer, if you're a distributor, let us know where you want us to be at, and we can start to plan an event around that and communicate it with our audience, and get out there and do a training day for people so they can get more hands-on experience and knowledge. And I think that's a critical component to training, not just our DIY, our do-it-yourself community, but also our installers. Training and actually getting some hands-on learning before you go out to install a product is super critical.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you mentioned, right, we have our training vehicles right now, and so those are being deployed across the country. And so if you're, not super close to one of those locations where we will do regular trainings at a distributor, we'll be able to, take those trucks around and hopefully hit somewhere more local and close. So we are doing everything we can to create opportunities and access to this training. We're not trying to gatekeep our hardware. The exact opposite. We want to share this information, but we know as installers go, if we were going to depend on everyone in the world to read install manuals, our jobs in our lives would be a lot easier. I think every
Yep.
manufacturer in the world could agree with that. And as a man, it's surprising to me that more of these installers are willing to call a stranger on the phone for help than read a manual.
Yeah.
The old stereotype of the man never wants to stop and ask for directions, ask for someone else. They know what they're doing, but at the end of the day, we're going to be here to help. We're going to keep answering those phones, but hopefully we'll get ahead of all the training, so you don't have to ask anyone for directions because you'll already know.
Yeah, this is not the it's like you need to read the manual. I'll tell a joke here. It's not the Svalgenborg children's desk from the large Swedish furniture supply store that you might go to and assemble the furniture on your own, right? We all know what I'm talking about. This is a highly technical piece of equipment, and it takes a lot to properly install it. It's on a professional level, it's a very easy piece of equipment to install. But reading the manual, understanding our documentation, and making sure that you're going through the installation process very procedurally, and following that manual, having the correct settings, which are described in the manual, all that stuff is very important, because again, we're not putting together something from the Swedish furniture store, which, being men, I don't know about you, but if I get something from the Swedish furniture store, I'm not reading the manual.
Not reading the manual. I'm pulling out the one tool.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to figure out where all the bolts are. And,
Yeah.
My legs may start on the wrong side of the chair, but they will end on the right side of the chair.
Yeah.
I'll get there. But, that's one thing to say for something that can't electrocute you to death.
Yeah.
It's another for, a very hard advanced piece of power electronics. As well as, a table doesn't have to play with the floor in the same way that an inverter has to play with the grid. There's a lot of moving components when it comes to, the hardware that we're using and installing. We want to make sure that we keep not only our customers and people installing our hardware safe, but, emergency, service people who would be getting on a roof or, trying to put out fires in the home. We're not trying to put their lives at risk. The small things matter because at the end of the day, almost every single home in this country will have solar on its roof.
Yeah.
Not the end of this day, but
No.
where things go, solar is by far the most abundant and accessible type of energy.
Yeah.
So, I see in 10, 15 years when every single roof has solar on it, these type of, as boring as it is, I like to take risks in my lives. I love riding my motorcycles and going out on adventures. But as boring as it is, we hold a responsibility to make sure that our homeowners and the general public are going to be safe, right? Because within all of these pieces of hardware, there's enough electricity to burn down any house you hook it up to. Even a 3,000 kilowatt inverter can short and create an immense amount of energy. And from that point, well, if it's sitting next to wood, there goes a house.
Yep.
So, the safety and the protocols that go into using this equipment, we do have to be trained on it, right? We need to know what we're doing. We need to know what we're working with. As a professional, for our electricians, it's a cinch. There really isn't any secret, mojo or magic that we're hiding to be able to use and access our equipment. But following the right procedures, making sure we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's. That's how we keep our customers safe. That's how we keep our community safe. In the same way, airplane mechanics have very, very strict standards for a reason.
Yeah.
When you're going to put your life, on the line for this equipment, procedures have to be followed, and we have to be able to document that. So that's what we're working on. Not to be a downer in that regard, but we're wanting to work with our installers. We want to make sure that they can do it quickly. Most of this stuff can go in under an hour. If you know what you're doing, this commissioning process isn't difficult. It's very, very quickly. If you're going to have to sit there and look up tech support numbers online because you didn't look at the QR codes on the manual or this or that, it's going to continue to add more and more time on your job site. And that's what we want to avoid. You shouldn't have to call us because you should have all of that knowledge ahead of time. And we're going to be working to get to you, to get there, and put that training in place.
Yeah.
So it'll be day by day, right? It won't be the end of today, but we're working. The end of this year, I think there will be a very big difference for our customers. They'll be able to see the access to training.
100%. As we continue to grow, gain more market share, just become a bigger company naturally as we are selling more products out into the market, we need to continue to redefine all of these little processes that go along with it. And they may be, in the grand scheme of things, they may seem small, but things like training are hypercritical. Without proper training, the customers don't know how to properly interact with the product, how to install it, how to use it. So it's just another step in our evolution to continuing to grow, and having you on the team to really manage that process is going to be huge.
One of the things, I'd love to point out, the method and our ability to support someone who is a DIY homeowner, and our ability to support someone who is a professional installer using our product, they're very different things.
Yep.
Right? Our DIY homeowners and installers, they're very likely living in the same place their inverter exists. So they are always going to be available and present to monitor, to look at, and they will have very likely personally researched a lot of the technical specifications and applications of our hardware. When it comes to our installer base, right, this may be a subcontractor who is used to installing a microinverter, right, or a very common, string inverter with maybe somewhat less feature sets compared to a hybrid. And they're doing these cookie cutters, 5 days a week, and suddenly they're asked to come in and put in an EG4. There's a change there. The difference is as well, if you mess up as an installer, it's unbelievably expensive to do a truck roll.
Yeah.
Right. I think every homeowner knows how frustrating it is to lose power, and every business owner understands how frustrating it is to have to go to a homeowner who has lost power. It's an expensive procedure. It loses a lot of credibility with your homeowners. It's something that installers avoid at all costs. I know, a lot of installers avoided batteries for the first, few years that they were in the market because they knew there were so many problems. They couldn't reliably deploy a battery and not have to ever come back. They knew if they were going to put something in there, they were going to be back 3 or 4 times to troubleshoot, to update firmwares, this or that. So EG4 has made huge steps in the hardware. Our wall-mountable battery is a really cool product. It's something that installs extremely simply. It communicates with our inverters. That type of a product line, removes the little bits and bobs, right? The little details that you might miss. I know where there's a thinking about some of the lengths that people will go to who live off grid, right?
Yeah.
Thinking of walls of batteries, right?
Yeah.
Hundreds of kilowatt hours of batteries. And those people are truly passionate about the energy that that they have,
100%.
and they're designing every little detail of their system, and they're obsessive in like the best way. I'm not,
Yeah.
I understand how that feels because I am the same way in my garage working on my own solar and batteries and things like that. And I only say that because I'm jealous that I don't have 100 kilowatt hours of my own batteries in my garage, unlike some of these people. But when we're working with our, installers, their goals are wildly different, right? You're not often going to be dealing with 100 kilowatt hours at a time. You're going to be dealing with two wall-mounted batteries, flex boss, and a 21 kilowatt inverter, right?
Yeah.
You're often, right, going to be trying to minimize the pieces and the offerings to customers so that your salespeople can be effective, right? Trying to get down to, that fast food style. You have three options: 1, 2, and 3. Pick one. We understand that trying to get a customer to tell you what they want for solar is a losing game, right? The customers who already know what they want have already gone, and found EG4 and purchased it themselves and installed it themselves. The installers we work with who are out there finding these leads, who are knocking on doors, right? They have to have a compelling and functional set of equipment for a homeowner. And if they can't sell that at a price that makes sense, then they're going to go out of business. And the one thing more than anything else that it's going to put them out of business that makes it unprofitable is truck rolls.
Yeah.
Right? You'll never be profitable. It costs just about $1,000 every time you have to come back to a job site.
100%.
And so, I would say some of the more aggressive companies, you could have a sales rep who would take $5,000 of profit for knocking on those doors with their big fat commission check. And all of that immediately could get wiped away if you have to troubleshoot 5 times because you had a bad communication cable.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to get ahead of that. We want to make sure that all of our installers have all of the tools they need. When they're on site the very first time, they'll be able to troubleshoot top to bottom to make sure that when they're there, they're going to be commissioning, they're going to be delivering power for customers.
100%. You mentioned like a lot of installers were installing very cookie cutter systems. That's a piece of terminology I use a lot myself. What we're finding is that technology does not work anymore in the market. It doesn't serve the homeowner's needs anymore. So many people are making the switch to full-on ESS systems, battery attachment, right?
The technology caught up. I mean,
Yeah.
you look before the pandemic, some of the most powerful batteries were putting in like 3.5 kilowatts of output. That was like 5 or 6 years ago, right? The power we use in our home has not really changed in 5 or 6 years, but our ability to provide that power distributed has greatly increased, right? Our supply chains, knowing what we want, has changed dramatically.
Yeah.
The hybrid inverters over the last 10 years have really helped shape what it looks like when it comes to energy storage. And so now we're seeing a lot more DC coupled battery systems that have that capacity. I think there's a lot of technology out there where they were more or less just cramming as many microinverters as they could into a casing of batteries and hoping that they were going to achieve a reasonable output.
Yeah.
In my eyes, that would be a solution I would struggle to scale. Servicing on a solution like that would be very difficult if you have, multiple inverters in an AC coupled solution, because you also still would need an MID type of unit. So where EG4 gets to come in with a lot of experience working with off-griders, we know what it's like to back up at all cost, right? We know what it's required to get away from the grid so that we don't put any linemen at risk.
Yep.
We've been solving those problems for a very long time, right? That's the bread and butter. That's where EG4 cut their teeth. So when it comes to working with installers who are now, adapting to the market, right? 5 years ago, you could just sell grid-tied only solar, right? Slap a bunch of panels on the roof, AC coupled, call it a day, no need for backup. The grid is your battery, 1-to-1, buy and sell ratio. But net metering's changing, right? Your time of use is changing. Suddenly, your ROI from 5 years ago is not the ROI today.
Yep.
And for the worse, which is really unfortunate for a lot of customers. I see the pattern often, showing up on islands and then to California and then, to Texas and to the rest of the United States. But, you look at time of use rates, right? You saw that in Hawaii and Puerto Rico way before you saw it in Hawaii or in California, right? And then you saw it in California before you saw other states in the United States start
Yep.
adopting to it. And they will, right? In California, some of these people who have been grandfathered in, from my understanding, if I'm wrong, please put a fact check in here. But I believe, they're amending it. If you sell your house now, you lose your NEM status,
Nem is gone. Yeah.
which it sucks,
They changed the rules on that too, which further reinforces like why grid tie solar alone, solar without storage, it's not the solution that's needed anymore.
From a macro scale, I totally get it, right? Like if I am governor of California and we're trying to address the needs of the grid, I can't incentivize people to just keep putting microinverters on their roof.
No.
Right? You look at that duck curve and you're thinking, well, holy crap, only 15% of homes in California have solar right now. I don't know what their exact number of deployment is.
Yeah, I think their market share or the market penetration is not like that high. It's like 20%.
And so 20% of people who maybe have enough solar on their roof for their own needs create that significant of a duck curve. Yeah, that's an issue.
And to real quick to talk about what the duck curve is, so the audience understands. Basically, when you look at the electricity that's available on the grid. By the way, when electricity, this is an important concept. When a power plant or whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, when a generation station produces electricity and it goes through the transmission and distribution network, the lines, okay, it is only there at the time that it is there, unless it's stored, right? It doesn't, if it's unused, it essentially, it's going to go away.
It dissipates.
It dissipates.
The grid, the power that you receive in your home is generally only about 50% of the power that was generated at the power plant.
Exactly.
Right. So where does it go? Well, that 50% that disappeared between here and there.
100%.
That's where
so like just to give everyone the understanding of what the duck curve is, the duck curve is literally a graph that shows the solar and it's not just solar. There's a duck curve that's represented across a lot of different energy sources, but solar alone, PV solar, grid tied PV, what started happening was when you look at the graph of the energy availability versus the demand of energy of electricity, during the day, it created an overabundance of electricity that was generated from grid type PV, no storage. And that overabundance would happen during the day when the sun is shining the most. Where are most people at during the day? They're not at home, so they're not using that direct PV input. It's being sold back to the grid. Mm-hmm. And because it's being sold back to the grid, it created this overabundance. And so for the utilities in a lot of ways, PV
every power plant has to turn off their generator.
Yeah.
It's very expensive to turn off that generator for 8 hours in the middle of the day, especially when you're manning your power plant, right? The 8 hours that everyone is awake and available, right? Those are the 8 hours that you're supposed to be turning it off because all of the solar is being generated. Yep. So if I'm the state, of course, I'm not going to incentivize more people to just keep slapping on solar without a way to store it. Yeah. Because it genuinely is creating struggles on the grid. Granted, I'm a full proponent for we need more of it. We just need to be smart about the way we deploy it.
I agree completely. We need more of it. And that's something to be clear to the audience is like, we do need more of it. It's just, we need it to be with storage.
Correct.
Because the storage component, the batteries, that's the cornerstone of what makes all of this work. And solar with storage, you can do anything that you want to do. You can go completely off grid. You can remain grid tied and in a lot of markets leverage your battery for virtual power plant programs, which we've spoken about in previous episodes, which EG4 is now participating in. But there's a lot of different things that you can do.
Well, I mean, in San Antonio, here in Texas, we've had a few good storms in the last few weeks. I lost power on the street from my house even 2 weeks ago and was able to back it up. I was actually out here driving out to EG4 and feel nice and warm and fuzzy knowing I could leave my wife at home. She would still have power. Not a big deal. Fortunately, everyone else on my street also got power by the time, the sun came up in the morning. And I don't think most of them even noticed. But I'm tied to the grid. I don't even have 100% offset. I can only generate about 90% of the power that I use across, the year or across the month, especially in the summer. But I still have a decent amount of backup. So, if we have massive hailstorms or, hurricanes, coming through the area, I very comfortably could get through a 6 to 8 hour outage or longer, depending on, if my solar is able to come up. Because you're right, there's oftentimes an overabundance of
Yeah.
solar available during these events. So whether it's on a micro scale for my house, I have a lot of solar in the middle of the day, or a macro scale for a state, and even Texas, right? Texas has now surpassed California for solar production within the last year.
That's an amazing feat.
It's incredible, take that.
Yeah. I guess not
that the oil guys would ever admit it.
Not to like diss California, but I know like Texas and California, sometimes there's a little bit of a...
It wasn't on my bingo list for Texas to beat California on the renewable race.
Yeah.
But I love to see it because, the more solar we have, the more pressure it takes off oil, the more, gas prices will lower, right? It's like, so it helps all of us if we have more access to energy. Even GDP is almost perfectly correlated to our ability to produce energy.
Yeah.
And so with EG4, that is a mission that this company truly is bought into, is getting energy generation to everyone, right? Once we can deliver this equipment, it'll generate power forever. And that translates into endless GDP, right?
I've said this before, and I make it known on record, it is a national security issue. Making solar affordable for all, having solar, being able to support the grid with, and I should say particularly solar with storage, it is a matter of national security. It really is. And I think like with all of the talk about 25D and the big, beautiful bill, all of the politicians that are running the country, whether you're right or left of center, I personally don't care. What I do care about is less about the fact that we're fighting over tax credits and subsidies. It's more about having solar and storage on your home is a matter of national security, and that is an inarguable fact. And the reason why is, if you are a true red-blooded American or not, right, you want to have it on your home, because the easiest thing for an outside influence to attack and the most susceptible thing is the grid. If we were, for example, to lose power, let's just say in an entire city, and this has happened in the past with the blackout of New York City in the 70s, it was a major blackout. It was a major issue. There were also California still has major blackouts, but it led to the recall of their governor in the past, in the mid-2000s. Blackouts and major attacks on the grid cause mass chaos, significant discomfort, and if they get exacerbated and worse in any way possible at all, and it is possible that can happen, and an outside influence could attack it, it is undoubtedly a way that we could be sent back almost 100 years in quality of life.
Well, think about, the freeze that happened in 2021, right?
In Texas.
Right. We were, from my understanding, under 60 seconds away from being a black start in the state.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things, things about that event. I won't dive too much into that. I remember hearing a little bit of the backlash, some politician, things like that, trying to blame the renewables for it. It's like, well, I know those windmills are still spinning. And I remember, I was in San Antonio at the time, and during the daytime, we would get power for about 1 hour at a time. And it's because they were rotating through. There was all the solar panels outside San Antonio. I can't remember their group, with Mission Solar, and there's a racking company and a tracking company that are all kind of, not OG, anyways. Those groups down there in San Antonio, the big old solar farms outside the city, and they were able to provide solar power directly to certain neighborhoods kind of on a rotating basis as the rest of the grid was getting up to speed.
So let's just talk about that event. The Snowmageddon, I live in the DFW area. We were calling it Dalaska. There were a lot of jokes made about it. And then there was a lot of slander towards renewables. There was slander on every side. The reality of the situation is that is a perfect example as to why solar and storage is a matter of personal security, but also a matter of national security, or at least in that level. Lucky it didn't get worse. Statewide security. In addition to that, people died.
People died. Yeah.
People died. And I don't want to go on a grim note here, but that is a reality. And this is a friendly reminder to everyone. This is why solar and storage is a matter of security. It really is.
And here's the grid, right, needed support. If there was 100,000 deployable batteries in this state that they could have just said, hey, we need our DER deployable energy resource, and we could just started using self-consumption on batteries across the state, there's a very high likelihood that those gas generation plants that did fail, right, that froze, right, due to the low temperatures, would have had time to thaw, to get up to speed, right, to get the service members out there to get those up and running.
Yep.
Right? I'm not saying that residential batteries would have had the capacity to run the state, not at all, but they could definitely have lowered the overall draw on demand, right? They could have definitely extended the window of opportunity for the other plants to be able to come online. One of the things to consider with that, on the macro scale, what does it cost the state, right? Even think about this. What does it cost the oil industry down in Houston if you have a statewide blackout, right? Your ports shut down, right? Your refineries shut down. I'm sure those guys have some big old gas, generators on site that they'll be able to kick up and get running. But when the rest of the state's not going, right, when you're trying to get a hold of all of, your transportation companies and they can't answer the phone because their office has no internet, what are you going to do, right? It'll cost millions an hour, right, for a state like that to recover. So when you say it's a matter of national security, you're absolutely right. It is very susceptible to, climate, disasters, right? A hurricane or tornado comes through. I mean, there was a tornado warning in San Antonio this week.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't take much for, very critical parts of town to lose power for a while. But being able to make power where you need it, being able to store power where you need it addresses a lot of these concerns. And that doesn't even, cover where the distribution side of our grid is, right? You look at our distribution lines, the reason we have these rolling blackouts and brownouts are because our lines don't have the capacity.
Yep.
Don't you think that if America could have solved our energy crisis by burning more coal, we would have done that already?
Yeah.
If we could have just set something on fire and had it actually solve our problems, I believe America would have jumped on that forever ago. And I think a lot of people still like to believe that's the case. And it's not our ability to generate power that's the issue. It's our ability to get it where we need it. If we were going to go out there and replace every power line in our country, it would cost us trillions, tens of trillions of dollars. Tens of trillions. And the utilities have asked, right? They said, if everyone gets an EV, we're going to have to rebuild all these power lines. Money, please.
Yeah.
Versus, well, if I have an EV, I'm going to put panels on my own house and charge it myself. Well, I'm going to ask a utility company distributed across the state for permission. Well, not permission. I'm going to always make sure my stuff is, I'm going to make sure I have permission.
Do it per
right.
code.
But, I don't see a need to have all of my power generated remotely, right?
Yeah.
If we have the ability to get solar panels across this country, and we do, right? We have, distribution partners in the roofing industry who are coming online, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about those companies, people have been just carrying solar panels one by one on top of roofs for the last 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And it hasn't been until, the last 3 or 4 years that roofing companies have gotten online, and now they have trucks to put them on. Those trucks have been around the whole time.
They figured out a better way because the industries combined.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
it's like we've had those trucks. The technologies have been here. It's about getting everyone together, right? It's about, and that's why I'm here, right? It's getting that training in place, making sure people know what's possible with this technology. I've seen this technology grow and change, throughout my lifetime. I grew up in Northern California, up in the valley, and my parents, they put some solar up in the pasture with the cows. And I remember when that got put in, I was pretty excited about it. I don't know, just anything going on, out in the
Yeah.
country is interesting.
Yeah. Something to play with.
If there was only one other reason, there would be a truck in my pasture, and that it was usually to take a cow out of it. So I was pretty interested, but seeing, I think we had 50 or 60 panels we ended up getting put up there. I mean, and this is the early 2000s, so they were probably 200-watt panels, would be my guess. I don't know. I couldn't tell you what inverters we were using, but I remember hearing the conversation that my parents were having with the solar company at the time. And even then, where we were out in the country, we were asking, like, well, what does it take if if the grid goes down? What happens if the grid goes down? It's like, oh, you're going to lose power. Well, what the
What
heck?
do you mean?
What do you mean, dude? It's like, you just put up 50 solar panels in my pasture. And it's early 2000s, that was definitely a chunk of change. The
Yeah.
incentives there were definitely more aggressive to reflect that. But they throw up all these panels, and I remember even myself being kind of like, what do you like? It's something about the inverters being the wrong kind of inverters.
Yeah.
And being in the industry now, thinking back like early 2000s, what inverter would have even been an option for backups? And
Yeah.
the guy, I remember distinctly hearing him explain to me with the solution he would have had. And he basically said, what we would do is get some lead acid batteries, a bunch of car batteries for you, and we'll basically string those together. And they're good for about 3 to 4 years, and we'd come back out here and would swap them out again.
Yeah.
And my parents were like, oh, no. Like,
But that's what solar and
But-
storage was at that
that's
time.
what existed. Lithium iron phosphate batteries existed in 2003,
Yeah.
right? Those technically existed in the 90s.
Just didn't make its way into
Didn't
the
make its
industry.
way there. The type of BMS boards, that we use in the solar industry, they're not new, right? Those existed in the early 2000s as well. Like, we're not, like, breaking. It always cracks me up when I see, companies talk about their AI batteries or this and that. And I'm like, no, like, you might have a good charging algorithm in there to make sure that, you have a healthy state of charge in there and things like that, help with your
Healthy
balancing.
cell life.
There are definitely algorithms to optimize that.
Yeah.
Right. But like, is my battery AI? It's like, no, dude, your battery is a battery. It is an electrochemical device that you can pump power into and power out of. And you might have a clever algorithm that helps it not blow itself up when you're pumping power into it. And that's great. But, for the most part, the solutions that we're using today, we're still plugging into breakers, right? That same breaker box on the side of a house that's been there since the 70s, right, on these people's homes, is the same exact thing we're plugging into, right?
Yep.
You don't need AI to produce 60 hertz to, split phase power,
Yeah.
right? We use power electronics. We're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just delivering it.
Yep.
It's really getting all these things together. I've been able to see the improvements for this technology has more so come in convenience and application,
Yeah.
right? It's for my parents, the application was a bunch of lead acid batteries, all strung, 12-volt batteries, right? Strung in series and then in parallel into some hybrid inverters. At that time, very likely only going to be up to a 6 kilowatt inverter, maybe, right? That was kind of your ballpark. Where today, right, we have all of our batteries have closed loop communication, right? We're using lithium iron phosphate. This is, an advanced lithium chemistry, so it's extremely power dense, but it's optimized for the use case. It's like, I wouldn't necessarily want LFP in my phone because it'd be bulkier and heavier, but I would absolutely want it in my garage because it's going to last longer and it's a lot safer, right? Lithium iron phosphate doesn't have the volatility that some other chemistries do. And it took us a while to figure out that was where we should be investing our resources in supply chain to produce home batteries.
Yeah.
Right? Early 2003, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some people thinking about it, but that's when it was really cutting edge. That's when I would say that was truly bleeding edge. We're just in the application phase right now.
100%, man. Yeah, lithium iron phosphate, the safety that comes along with it. It's obvious that we've seen pretty much everyone who's a genuine name in the industry make the switch towards that.
Mm-hmm.
Also we are a leader in the DC coupled battery solution space. We're also seeing a lot of our competitors move towards the DC coupled battery,
Yep.
which is interesting, right? Because everyone thinks of like EG4 as this small but mighty fighter, but now we're kind of driving the industry towards actually what we've been doing already, which is neat. With that said, do you remember when we went to Burgerland?
Mm-hmm.
And we got by the way, if you're ever in Sulphur Springs and you go to Burgerland, don't order the fries just for yourself. Because the medium fry is basically enough for 4 people.
Yeah,
It's
like a
huge.
full paper bag of.
It's like a foot. Yeah, it's insane. Which really great place. We always encourage people to come
Get some
visit
chili
us.
on there, and you'd have a whole
Yeah,
meal
yeah.
on its own for sure.
Definitely. I remember when we went there, you had told me about your quote unquote retirement plan. Yeah, a different kind of a solar farmer, an actual solar farmer. With
Yeah.
that said, why don't you actually like tell us your solar story?
So, I think a lot of it starts, it's like my parents' pasture. I'd spend some of my time putting firecrackers and cow patties. The rest of the time, trying not to get electrocuted, messing around with the solar stuff. Granted, I don't know, I didn't mess around too much with my parents. My dad loved that solar panels. He was getting his ROI. He was all about it. But growing up, I was always a hands-on type of person. I liked fixing things, and I always needed something to tinker on. So naturally, when I went out to school, everyone's told me to go be an engineer. I went out to BYU, which was great school. Loved the mountains, loved scenery, loved skiing, loved mountain biking. I went into engineering, was able to kind of take an array of different courses. But on my way out, I actually found a friend, believe it or not. The friends we meet along the way.
Yeah.
But he had been on the sales side of things for multiple different companies, and had some connections and realized that the solar industry was ripe for some disruption.
Yeah.
Not only because there was a pandemic going on, and so due to there being massive supply chain shortages, there was a much more even playing field, right? If you're a multi-billion-dollar company and you can't get anything, and I am a $4 company, and I can't get anything, we're still suddenly, a lot more equal on footing. So we figured it was as good a time as any to give it a shot. So I got into the solar industry while I was still actually finishing up my degree. Granted, again, pandemic, it's not like anyone was actually going to class. All the schools were closed. But it got me involved into the technology of it all. Again, being a tinkerer, I got involved to be the technical guy. So I was, always pulling out my CAN bus tools and working on the equipment, figuring out what our applications could be. Right, trying to solve, backup solutions for, all-in-one type main panels, and what do we do about these things? What does it look like when we're doing grid ties versus, critical load panels? And so I got into the industry coming from the battery side of things. My company was exclusively focused on LFP. I became, like a missionary for that chemistry. I'd preach that gospel all day long. And then, understanding where our market was going for the way we use power, right? We talked about the duck curve, and saying, well, if we have solar alone, it's actually not going to solve all of our problems, because the sun goes down and suddenly there's a huge gap, right? And when the sun is up, well, we have to tell all of our traditional generators to turn themselves off, which is expensive for them, and then makes it even more expensive when the sun comes, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, well, we have to solve these problems. And so for solar to ever grow, it was going to need battery storage. And that's not news, right? When they were messing around with solar cells in the 70s and said, dang, this thing's pretty cool. We've got the silicon really pumping out. We could definitely scale this up. I guarantee those guys recognized for that to truly power the world, they were going to need batteries.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sure they would be pleased to see, we're working on it. Those batteries are really coming along. Every day our batteries, improve, and there are countless, researchers across the globe always working on more advanced battery chemistries, right? So one day we'll be able to replace our LFP batteries with, maybe something sodium based that's more accessible and can be regionally sourced.
Yeah.
I love that vision. That's where I hope my career in solar takes me. Is helping to push technology and push the adoption. So, I got into that side of things. I was working with stackable batteries, getting real big storage capacity. When in 2020, the biggest batteries we had, a lot of them only had a 5 to 10 kilowatts of output.
Yep.
More of them being on the 5 side. I think there were some DC coupled solutions and EG4 being on that side of things, who could scale their DC batteries and actually get whole home backup, right? If you could get your batteries.
Yeah, I mean, people, quite frankly, we came from the DIY community, and
the server rack style is the bread and butter, right?
A lot of people were doing whole home backup on their own, and what you saw that was more commercially at that time was AC coupled battery solutions that had 10 kilowatts of capacity, but a 3.8 kilowatt, output.
Yeah.
It really, really puny.
Well, and that's why they weren't providing backup, right?
No.
It was rate arbitrage, right? It was to address time of use.
Yeah.
Right. I know power is expensive this time of day. It's cheap this time of day. We're gonna do some clever buying and selling. But tornado comes through, grid goes down. I would hope that they would have some of those loads on a backup panel that could be supported.
Loads on a critical loads panel, but not much.
If the installer went through the effort of wiring a critical load panel for them, and I hope in those cases they do. But I got involved in the industry when that was the standard and said, well, we should start delivering whole home backup, right? The inverters around that time were starting to get powerful enough, and if they weren't, you could at least use 2 of them and achieve the goal.
Yep.
People were still using a lot of third-party disconnects, right? So they would go find a transfer switch from a generator.
Yeah.
Right. So we would just go find a generator brand, disconnect, put that on your one-line diagram, as well as your 2 hybrid inverters and your battery bank. And they were pretty cool solutions. Those guys are still out there running. They still out there paying for themselves.
Yeah.
And there was an ROI that got painted on those systems 5 years ago. And unlike all of the grid tie microinverters, their ROI hasn't changed, right? Their ROI, if it was a 7 or 8 year target, they're still going to be eating away at their target because they own all of their power, right? For the people who had a grid tie system and were promised a 3 or 4 year ROI because they got it up on the roof for nothing, and then suddenly their net metering policy changes or their time of use changes, well, shucks,
Yeah.
Now instead of being 3 or 4 years, you're back over 10, right? You're
10
past
or
warranty.
20 in some cases. So, I mean, even back in the earlier days of really seeing the mass market adoption of batteries and solar, the people that decided to do batteries are far better off than the people that didn't. They really are. There's no 2 ways about it.
It's tough because I feel for the salesman who has to go to a homeowner and try and pencil out where the battery pays for itself, because no one has ever told you how, right?
Yeah.
And so they've all told you how to do that for a solar panel, right? You say it's like, okay, here's my solar panel, here's the sun hitting it. We know 365 days a year, average, here's how much sun is going to hit that panel, here's how much power that's going to produce. Your utility promised you in this agreement that they're going to give you X amount of money, right? And it's very easy to document and prove exactly how that's going to pay for itself over the course of 5 or 10 years. It's unfortunate when the agreement with the utility changes, and hopefully we don't see too much more of that happening. But when you have your battery system, one, you take that utility agreement somewhat out of the equation if you have enough capacity to hold all of your power, right? For myself, I can't hold all of my power, right? I've got 24 kilowatt hours in my home. What I produce in a day, I will never be able to store, not without some more batteries. But it helps, right? And so when I have to pull back later in the day, maybe when it would be expensive, I can still cover most of my loads throughout the rest of the day. And so you're going to find a balance in there as well.
100%. I always say the payback, and I've sold solar systems. I came from prior to my time at EG4 was running an installation company. I definitely will have always sold battery technology, and sold it to a person with the very clear intention that this is guaranteed, your battery technology. No agreement with the utility is ever guaranteed. Anything can change at any time. And so I actually say with a battery, I can give you a guarantee in terms of ROI.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that this is your energy. There's no other agreement that's necessary, especially if you have enough to store everything that you need.
Well, I think some people will get caught up on being 99.9% of us are grid tied.
Yep.
Right. We have an incredible DIY base, and I would love to see some of the cabins, things like that people have built off grid. Right. But most of the time we're on the grid. Right. Our jobs are on the grid, our work's on the grid, our homes are on the grid. That's where most of us are living. And so, for myself to say, it's like I have 99.9% of my needs being taken care of. Right. It's like I can lose power in my home, within the last couple of weeks and be able to fulfill all of those needs. Right, being able to cover all of those needs versus being entirely off grids they can be very different in scope and requirements. And so my point is, for those of you who are on the grid, don't let someone convince you that you need 300 kilowatt hours of storage to be fully self-sufficient.
Yep.
Right, because it's just not the case. Right, our grid in the United States is extremely reliable. We could even go through statistics of what an average grid blackout looks like in this country and show that, right, it's only ever a couple of hours at a time. Mm-hmm. And so you're not going to need a, garage stacked top to bottom of storage, but having, right, an appropriately sized battery with your array. Even if I can't produce 100% of what I use in the middle of the summer, and that's because I'm in San Antonio, it's hot at 1 a.m., it's hot at 5 p.m., it's hot at 7 a.m., it's never not hot, so my AC is running. And so I'm using a lot of power even when I can't generate it. And so to say that I couldn't have a functional system without an absurdly large battery is not true. It's like I can cover my backups. I can basically reduce my bill to almost nothing. Even though my battery is only 24 kilowatts or kilowatt hours, and I'm using close to 100 kilowatt hours a day, I can still cover 99.9% use case scenario.
Yeah.
Right. If the grid goes down or doesn't, the sun's going to come up. Right. We still have sources to charge and to use that type of generation. So, for our grid tie folks, EG4 is a great option, right? You don't have to worry about the days of building full walls of 300 kilowatt hours anymore, right? To be an off-gridder, right? You could be attached to the grid, have 2 wall-mounted batteries and a flex box, and be able to disconnect with the grid anytime there's a blackout or brownout. Keep your air conditioner running. For me, just keep your air running.
Yeah.
There's nothing more miserable. I don't know. When I say backup, I mean I want my life to resume as normal. Yeah, and for me, that means the air, right? And if you're living somewhere in the South US, I guarantee you feel the same way, because it literally is life or death, right?
You have to have air conditioning.
Heat waves come through, people die.
Yeah.
Right. And if you don't have air conditioner, that literally is a safety factor. So for me, being able to keep a reasonable amount of air on, it's like, hopefully this maybe buy me some brownie points. I keep my air generator at like 77 or 78 in the daytime, and I will drop it down a couple degrees when I'm sleeping. I can't do 77 when I'm sleeping. Oh my gosh, I sweat.
Yeah, that's rough.
And so it's like, I'm not
my wife won't allow that. It's like she's trying to put it down to 67 at night, and I'm like, I don't even know if the air conditioner can keep up.
Yeah.
It's 100 degrees out at night. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
And so it's like, I'm not trying to keep it down to that degree, but still, it's like, that's a lot of power coming out every single day. And even though I'm using 100 kilowatt hours a day, my 25 kilowatt hour battery is doing the trick.
Yep.
Right. you'd be surprised by how dynamic these systems are as they're working, because you have solar production throughout a lot of the day, and you can cover those loads directly. What's really cool is there's more and more smart technology coming online. One of the things I think will be neat is some of these heat pump or heat battery water tanks, like smart water heaters, right? And being able to use that as a distributed energy resource. Because you think, you on a macro scale in California, you have this big old duck curve. Well, what if half the homes in there had heat or water heaters that you could control? And when they all get home from work that day, they're going to take a shower. So they will be using that hot water, and they will need to use that energy at some point. Well, water stores energy extremely well. You only need it to come out of the faucet a little over 100 degrees, but you could store it up to 200 degrees, right? And it is an extremely efficient thermal material to store heat.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing more and more of these pieces coming online, so that we can consider energy as kind of one sum rather than individual pieces, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's energy for my car to get around for the day, energy for my heater in my house, right? Running my heat pump, energy to cool down my house, energy to run my computers and my wells and my pumps and things like that in my car, whatever it is. I think one of the cool things about electrification is it consolidates it, right? We're kind of getting back to energy. It's not my wood pile out in the back and my jerry can full of diesel in the barn, right? And if you're really old school, a little wheel out in the stream, right? Turning a little turbine for a little electrical light.
A hamster wheel.
Yeah. So, I used to have a dream. Oh, I had it. Sorry, I won't go there. I used to have a dream of being able to be out on a farm and having everything be like hydrogen powered, and thinking like, cool, if I could have my solar panels out DC couple, and this is daydreaming, this is not legal electrical advice. I don't know what disclaimers we have to make. Daydreaming, if I get a good string of solar panels there, well, electrolysis loves DC power. Cool.
Yeah.
That seems pretty straightforward. If the sun's up, well, I could start generating, water gas, or maybe I would need explicitly hydrogen I can separate and whatever. I could pick and choose what I want to do there. But you could run a standard gasoline engine off of the gas you generate through electrolysis. There are some caveats there. It's not a super efficient process. For the electricity you get, I've now been converted to realizing I should just slap a battery in there and call it a day.
The electrolysis of water?
Yeah, if I was going to take electrolysis with water, store all of that hydrogen, put it in a tank, take that tank of hydrogen, and then pump that back into the intake of my car, that is a feasible thing. The technology, they already do that. You can get a propane kit and run your car today, right? You've got an old Chevy that you're running. I know for a fact
I can run it on propane.
You could get a natural gas tank in the back of your truck tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And that's not a crazy concept. And the gas you get out of electrolysis and water is very, very similar. And with a little bit of simple chemistry, you could even get it more closely to resemble the natural gas that you'd run in those systems. But you don't even have to, is the point. And what's beautiful is you'd have beautiful, clean water as your only exhaust byproduct, which is incredible.
Fuel, it's traditional fuel cell technology.
Your V8 with 300,000 miles on it might have a little bit of oil in the tailpipe coming out with it. I don't know how burn it's cleaning these days. But as far as your inputs go, in goes water, out goes clean. Anyways,
I actually have a dream too, and that's basically. Leveraging so you can leverage the electrolysis of water to create hydrogen, right?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Hydrogen, when burned as an internal combustion fuel source, is the only byproduct is water. That would come out the tailpipe. I know, there was the Hydrogen 7 series from BMW, and it wasn't very efficient, but
the tank leaked because it's high pressure hydrogen, and to keep it, from blowing things up, they have to have a little release valve. So if you leave it in your garage for 3 days, eventually the tank would go out.
Right? There were some issues, but
that engine ran.
Yeah, but my theory is we can't use fresh water, right? Mm-hmm. We would have to pump in water somewhere, desalinate it, likely from the ocean, right? Because that's a better water source.
And then recatalyze it, because you can't just use distilled water,
Right.
because it's not very efficient in that process.
Right. We'd recatalyze it and then use solar panels to power the device that would essentially create, that would leverage electrolysis of water, right? To create hydrogen, store the hydrogen, pump it, and then that's your primary fuel source. In a way, that is the true circle of life of a totally renewable thing. I know we're short on time, so we've got to wrap it up, but I will say the amount that's in your brain is mind-blowing, literally. So we're so happy to have you on the show, Joel. To the audience, guys, drop us a comment, reach out to us on social media, definitely comment on the video so that we can come back to you and let us know where you want to see us bring the training trucks so that we can host some training classes in your area and be able to get as much people the information that you guys want to hear about localized to you. We're going to hit the road with the EG4 Roadshow starting the week after the 4th of July. We're going to get the training truck out, and we're going to be going along the East Coast, and then we're going to do some trips on the West Coast.
Yep.
We want to hear your feedback as to where you want us to be. Joel, any last thoughts?
Yeah, no, reach out. We'll be, Puerto Rico to California. We're here to, get you trained up and get you involved. EG4 is honestly, it's a cool place to be. This company genuinely cares. The people here care about the mission, right? Energy generation for everyone. It's a good mission. That's something that can get me out of bed in the morning. Because I know what happens when you can put that type of power into someone's hand.
Yeah.
This is the power to transform communities, and that's something that excites me. I support that mission, and I'm really, really glad that I'm somewhere that believes and serves that mission.
100%.
Yeah, I've talked to John. He knows I've got 1.5 million ideas in my head and where this can all go, but we want to deliver clean power. And we're full of people who want to help that happen.
Awesome.
So
we're stoked.
If you need us, reach out. We're going to be here to help. And we're growing. We're going to keep growing. So our resources will continue to expand with our bandwidth. Our only fault is being human, I suppose.
Yeah.
Give us a shot and we'll give you everything we have.
That's right. So thank you all for joining. Thanks, Joel, for being here. Another awesome episode of Power Hour, and we implore you to power more with EG4, your source for true whole home backup.